everybody, and welcome to the Empowering Industry Podcast. I'm your host, Charli Matthews. So happy to be here with my guest, Jeff. We've known each other for a while, but jump on here and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Jeff Shiver. I'm a managing principal with People and Processes.
And Jeff, I've seen you around like in industry at different events in the maintenance and reliability field, but kind of tell us a little bit about what you do in your day to day and I guess, how did you get into this industry?
Okay. I guess we probably should start with the history first and then move into the day-to-day kind of thing, if that makes more sense.
Perfect.
So anyway, I actually started my career, it's kind of a storied past, if you will, but I started my career at Proctor and Gamble doing contract electrical engineering. Then I left there and went to IBM in Manassas, Virginia, doing facilities, basically silicon wafer manufacturing, clean room design. In addition to that, the federal systems contracts pieces as part of that. Then I left and I went to Mars. So Snickers, Skittles, Pedigree Whiskas, Waltham, pet foods, snack foods. Mars makes at the same time. Caesar Change is another brand, pasta sauces. And then they used to have a thing called Mars Electronics. And so anyway, but inside of that world, I spent 20 years inside that world, and I literally did many, many different roles. Everything from a reliability technician, starting a predictive program, vibration infrared ultrasound, uh, also controls, I actually worked in 4 different plants. So started in Cleveland, Tennessee, then Albany, Georgia, then helped them build a plant in Columbia, South Carolina, then Waco, Texas. I had 2 corporate roles as well as part of that. And so going back to the different roles, if you will, say reliability technician, controls technician as part of building the plant, doing electrical engineering, was a shift manager, a maintenance manager, overall maintenance manager, really called a continuous improvement manager at the time. And with that, I actually had 2 maintenance managers, and I was responsible for all of maintenance, probably close to 100 technicians. And what was really cool about that is we led the change from being very reactive to very proactive. And so in the first 18 months, we gave back about $20 million worth of capacity, reduced waste and scrap by 10, and reduced the maintenance budget by 2 million. And then I went on to become the operations manager. And after a period of time of doing that, I actually left and started People and Processes. And with People and Processes, our focus is basically consulting and training and coaching relative to the maintenance and reliability best practices. So we literally do everything from assessments to planning and scheduling to storerooms to just overall best practices education. We're also part of the Aladon network. So we do Reliability Center Maintenance 2 and Reliability Center Maintenance 3. So we're certified practitioners with that. And we're also part of the University of Tennessee, member of the RMC. And so we do both a lot of the training, if you will, at the university itself there in Knoxville, Tennessee. So that's kind of a snapshot, if you will.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I'll add a little bit more while we're talking about it. Certified literally, I think sometimes every way to Sunday, literally, I think. So CRLs, CMRP, CPMM, ARP, excuse me, with all the different levels through Mobius as well. So MLT1, Machinery Lubrication Technician 1, and then as we said, the RCM2 and RCM3 practitioners. So usually what happens is when we go to these conferences and things, if I don't have the answer, I know who does. So
Absolutely. And I think that it's just a testament to your knowledge about the industry, being in industry, being in these maintenance and reliability positions, and working there and understanding, what is the problems, what are we trying to solve here, to be able to coach or train people because you've been through it. And so I love setting us up that way because I am going to ask you a little bit about those problems. What are the common problems in maintenance and reliability for today?
it's interesting when we talk about that. And as you know, I also write a column for Plant Services magazine called From the Plant Floor. And I just polished off a column just yesterday and sent in. And it basically talked about all the different levels. I'm constantly, I guess, astonished, if you will, because we have so many organizations that literally still have nothing. They go all the way up to those that are very, very proactive and, would be considered world class, by many standards. It's interesting to see that. And the struggles, like say, if I look at the site I was in last week as an example, they have nothing. They have no planner. They have a maintenance engineer, but not necessarily trained as a maintenance engineer. They have, the staff themselves, no one in the organization has really had any formal, especially while there, has had any formal education in maintenance reliability best practices. So when you talk about painting the vision, they really can't paint the vision, and they can't set that up for success with the leadership as well. And the leadership has changed significantly. But there again, we can go and see. So, like I say, every organization, we talk about it in terms of, have nothing or kind of emerging, if you will, have started the journey and trying to get better and trying to teach people and educate people on the right way to do things and leverage some coaching, for example. And then, we see those that they're on the path, as I said, but you see them also that have been on the path and have fallen back. Management's changed, the strategy changed, all these things have happened to them, and they really are struggling. And I think, kind of the gist of the article as well was that, it's interesting to see the people who know the right thing, who know what to do, but yet choose not to take any action. And they're in management roles in some cases. And you're just like, well, why do you feel handcuffed? Because I mean, change just simply starts with a single step, if you will. And they're in a position to influence the change, and it's within their span of control. They might own the maintenance department, but they're still not really pushing it forward. And you kind of have to ask yourself why. Because I don't know about you, but I know when I was a maintenance manager, I didn't like late night calls. I don't want to have to go into the plant in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to have to call the plant manager and deal with all these things. I'd much rather be going fishing or something else and on the weekends and not having to stay at the plant because things aren't running well. So it's always this kind of self-driven thing, if you will. But there's a lot of people who could make change but choose not to for whatever reason.
Well, I think that's where the coaching comes in too, because sometimes we know what we need to do, like you were saying, but we either need permission or approval or something that's blocking us from just taking that next step. I love that. There's the first step in that action to get people in alignment with where we need to go with the company or that shift or whatever. So I think that was really, I hadn't thought about that before, but I know that that's part of what you're doing now in the industry of coaching and just getting those people to understand that they do have that within their ability to change.
I can tell you a little story. We have lots of them, right? Of course, during the course of our years of doing this, but it happens I was with a particular organization, and they had put a reliability engineer into a planner position. And the goal was is they wanted to take that reliability engineer, have them develop all the processes for planning and scheduling, and then roll those out to about 7 other plants in the organization. And when I went to the site, and they asked me to come to the site and do an assessment, if you will, to understand the current state with the planning and scheduling specifically. And literally, I sat down with that particular individual, and 2 questions into the assessment, I almost just shut the laptop and I said, okay, well, clearly you're not doing anything that's related to what you were supposed to be doing here. And we found that basically management had changed the direction, even though he was in a corporate role and reported to the corporate engineers. They still, the local site directors had changed that path, and like, okay. And so then we have to spend, the rest of the week literally explaining, okay, here's what planning and scheduling is all about. Here's how we make it go forward. And it's to the point, that you talked about the coaching aspects. So even though you might go to a class, and I see this when I teach classes at the University of Tennessee as well, even though you might go to a class, for example, and you get the education, when you go back into the site, what happens is now, you're back into the world. Nobody else heard the same message that you did. They only sent the one planner, if you will. They go back and, okay, now I need to go make change, but they're not empowered to make the change. And supervision, for example, basically says, okay, we don't have time for that. Let's go do this instead. And you get into all the distractions, and exactly right. This is where the coaching piece comes in. We say that the education is only half the training. The other half's actually coaching, where you actually roll up your sleeves and you walk a mile in their moccasins. You go and you attend the meetings. You go to the scheduling meetings. You go to the morning production meetings. You go to all those things, and you look and say, okay, what are we really doing, and how are we progressing this forward, and what steps need to be done differently to make it. And you talk about people that don't have anything. For example, you often find that if they have workflows or processes, graphical workflows, RACI charts, responsibility, accountability, support, and information, and a charts, people don't necessarily follow them. And you'll often find this example too, even like on the scheduling side, maintenance will sometimes, I'll call it like huddle up into the cubbyhole somewhere and they'll put together a schedule, but production was never part of that plan. And then what happens is they get into the field and wow, it doesn't go as they planned because production wasn't a party to it. And so there's no buy-in, there's no ownership, from either party, from production especially. And so then, we wonder why it's not successful. So that's really where the coaching plays in. It's really a two-piece part of that. And we also do certification as well to help validate even more so, what, for example, planners or storeroom personnel are actually doing and how do they move forward in their game and up the game.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me kind of back to their article, and we will link to that in the show notes when it becomes live for everyone, or how to get in touch with you to get that for sure. But as they're, coaching, and you're in that room, you know what you need to do. How do you really get them to that next step? That we're in there. How do you get people to hear their ideas when they kind of feel like they are against the wall, if you will? They're all alone on this island, and they know they've been to the training, and they come back to the office. How do we actually get the buy-in from everyone else?
It depends, whether you're trying to get the buy-in at the lower levels or up above. And it's somewhat easy for people in management roles to manage down, if you will. The real challenge, I think, for them is managing up and convincing their managers or the executives, as an example, is how do we move this forward? And to do that, you really have to build a business case at the end of the day. And as another example of that, we were asked to work with a group, and normally with executives, I only get a couple hours. Usually I get an hour, 4 hours maybe. And this one particular group, they gave me 2 days with the executives. And what had happened is that the executives had spent basically 2 years, $5 million trying to implement a computerized maintenance management system across their sites. And at the end of that 2 years, they weren't any closer. And the CMMS company had basically sold them the system by telling them that they said, okay, if you'll just put the system in, you will get reliability. And we both know that this computerized maintenance management system is simply a tool. And so anyway, they were successful. And so the corporate group asked me to come in and speak with them. And it was really interesting because even the VP of manufacturing, we're going over the PF curve, the infamous PF curve, if you will, and talking about just having a window of time to plan and schedule and become more proactive. And the VP of manufacturing jumps up and says, Jeff, the problem is with our preventive maintenance procedures, we're actually looking for the point of failure as opposed to the potential failure. And I said, yes, you're exactly right. And at that moment, talking about getting that buy-in, the corporate guys, they said, "Hi, at this point, we really think they're starting to understand, so they get it now. And based on that, we can really move forward." And they were able to do that. But it started with coaching at the top, with both training and coaching at the top.
Don't you
So
think it's also like listening, like being involved in that process, and you can kind of pick out and read the room, if you will, and observe when they do have that light bulb moment, because then it's important to them, and you can kind of see, okay, if we go that route and adjust things to where it is going to serve them. And I think that's part of our job as leaders, to be able to do that with our employees or our community. The other thing I wanted to tell you, back to the article and the best practices. So there's a training and understanding of best practice, and when you have that and you have that knowledge, right? And you kind of, if you get the certification, you feel like, okay, I really have that knowledge, right? I've got a certificate around that. But you're giving that information to the industry by publishing kind of the best practices. But that next part of buy-in and follow-up and accountability, I think is really what's going to help that action go to the next step. And you need both, right?
yeah, so I think there's two pieces really to that come to mind immediately. And the first piece is that we don't know where to start. And a lot of them truly don't understand where to start. And if we think about, what will give me the biggest bang for the buck, and it depends again where you're at. But oftentimes we find, for example, even with your preventive maintenance task, most of the PMs is from doing the reliability centered maintenance and doing the analysis and organizations and so forth. It's not uncommon for us to find that 40 to 60% of the tasks that are currently being done actually add no value because they don't address the likely failure modes. And in some organizations, we're doing way, way too much PM. You'll see, some organizations, getting close to 80, 85% of the time is spent doing nothing but preventive maintenance. And then the problem is it doesn't address the failure modes and still they still have the failures. So that's kind of some of the parts of it. But in addition to that, so well, I go back and hit, some of the value and the quickest returns, planning and scheduling, preventive maintenance, having the right processes in to address the likely failure modes. Those are some basic things. But I think coming back out and zooming back out, if you will, I think the biggest problem is people simply don't have a plan. They don't necessarily know when to start, where to start, and then they also don't really have a plan. And it's one of the things I really enjoy. If I could pick a perfect client engagement, it would be go in and do some level of assessment. It doesn't have to be a huge deep dive that takes a tremendous amount of effort, because just like you said, we can read the room, we can read the organization, we can see where they're at and what they need to do differently. And then we can put together a plan with the leadership team and say, okay, boom, what is it that we need to do? What's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck in the shortest amount of time, but yet progress them on the path? And then, these plans can be 2 to 3 year type activities, if you will, that they can budget for, because oftentimes they don't necessarily have the budget set up to do some of the training and some of the travel, maybe to go to some of the training. But we even talk about, lubrication practices, or the PMs, or condition-based monitoring, using predictive technologies or process instrumentation. They're not really thinking along those lines. And just as a perfect example, the location that I was at last week, no predictive maintenance at all, not even laser alignment for, any kind of gear, machine trains or anything at all. It's just like, not even basic belt alignment, if you will, with the simple shiv and sprocket alignment tool. So just a lot of opportunity to really improve and move the needle. And even though they might be a more regulated industry, they still have that opportunity to do that. But again, what I push them for is, okay, where's your plan? What is it that's most important, and how are you going to progress going forward? And then part of that plan becomes things like education. How do you get the buy-in? Part of that.
Yeah, and I think also you having to show up and be there and see it and see where they're at, like meeting them where they are. And that's otherwise you're going to be pitching them something that's, that they can't use. And just like that you're talking about with the CMMS, like it'd be great if we all could just plug and play and, we all knew how to use it and business went great after that. But there's some training. And the other thing is like, I think about the word coach and like, of course, I was a basketball player in high school, so I always think about that. But it was took practice, right? It doesn't just happen overnight, and you're not just all of a sudden a leader, or all of a sudden you've got the perfect team or the perfect equipment or process. There's a time and a commitment that's involved with that, and I think it's nice to have a coach to kind of check in and push you along. To tell you straight whether it's you're on the right track or you're not, right?
Absolutely. And as part of that, it's just like it's, we like to say, we'll call the baby ugly. We don't necessarily like to call the baby ugly, but sometimes the baby is ugly, and we just have to be blatantly honest and say, here's what you need to do to think about fixing that. And sometimes, maybe it's a union organization that is restricted by contract rules or whatever from doing certain things, but there's still ways around a lot of that. And I find it doesn't matter really whether it's union or non-union. At the end of the day, the struggle is real for both groups. And how do you move it forward, as you said? But that coaching piece is just like you said, you wouldn't field a softball team or a basketball team or something like that without a coach. And so it's incredibly important that you do that as well. First, the training, for example, paints the vision, Charlie. But then out of that, how do you actually coach to make sure they're successful? And just like you're talking about with regard to the practice, okay, we can go do this. And you think about, you go to a planning and scheduling class, you put a coach in there, and then the coach says, okay, let's put together our first steering team, not a steering team meeting, but a scheduling meeting, as an example. And it doesn't work out great first time. Not everybody participates, but it gives the coach and also the other people an opportunity to reflect on that, the practice, if you will. And the next time we do it again, we get a little better. And it's really one of the things that a practice does for you as well is you've established a cadence. You've had the discipline to go do it, and you're continuously pushing forward. And that's really what the coach is doing as well. Is there, and I encourage this too. Even if you don't have a coach, have a cadence. What are you doing every week, and how are you making sure that you're trying to look? What can we do differently? And another thing that I often see is most people don't audit, especially in the maintenance piece. Sure, we've got ISO 9,000 audits. We've got all those kind of things that we do, but we really don't audit our business processes and maintenance. And so we should take like three work orders out of the stack and look at those and say, okay, this week we take those three out, we walk them down, we take the storeroom person, we take the planner, we take the schedule if we have a separate schedule, the supervisors, the technicians, the manager, sometimes even the plant manager. And we talk about, okay, was the equipment available when we got there? Did we meet the schedule? Did the processes work? Did we kit the materials? Did we have a corrective job plan to do the work? Was the corrective job plan right? Was there feedback on it? So lots of opportunities to just continuously improve. Rome wasn't built in a day. And so with regard to that, it's just like you said, how do we practice? How do we continue to get better? How do we continue to evolve? And it's a really key piece. And I think most of us get sidetracked with that and choose not to spend time. We let the day-to-day distractions do it. And then we just get into this cycle of despair, if you will, or cycle of doom, we call it. And we just kind of evolve back in, fall back down. It's just really, it takes the discipline. Takes
Yeah,
the
and
discipline.
I think also the training and the resources that are out there, whether it's assets that are people, or the resources that are training in a room, books, podcast, etc. I think I could talk to you all day about this, Jeff. I love the leadership aspect of this, and I can see that this actually relates to other businesses outside of maintenance and reliability. So I've definitely learned that over the years of just culture and what we talk about around culture and reliability too. So I want to leave you kind of with the last word before I get into a little rapid fire because I just am so curious. What else do you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think the real challenge is to have a plan. Think about how you will, get the buy-in from the other people, and realize change is not necessarily that difficult. We say people resist change, but you think about this. Many of us, we bought houses, we have families, we've gotten married, we've done those things, and yeah, okay, I get those are societal norms. But the reality is people don't understand change in many cases because we only present the positive of making the change. We don't present the negative of the change and also the positive and negative of not making the change. And so we really have to address all four quadrants of that matrix and then help people understand, okay, how do we do this and what's in it for them and what's also not in it for them as well. But then we also have to reward the first followers because what we're trying to do is hit that tipping point, if you will. And it's one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that we all, I mean, if we can all just get more routines in our life, we're going to be saving a whole lot of energy, which I know I've talked about on the podcast before, those habits and those rituals and the cycle of change. If we can do that, I just love the amount of energy that we can take and use on something else. If you think about savings as well and use it for something else. But I am curious, what is your favorite book, Jeff?
So one of my favorite books is actually it's more so the business book, Good to Great. I enjoy Good to Great.
Yes,
So
me
there's
too.
there's
I
a
like
lot of
that
them,
one.
and I'll share with you. It's kind of you talked about this, but it's interesting because maintenance people I've read of studies or heard of studies where a maintenance manager only reads like one book a year, and in many organizations you don't even get that. And so it's just like, well, what are you doing to educate yourself and to improve your game? And you mentioned the word earlier that was around accountability. Oh my, what a dirty word. You know, nobody wants to hear that word, but it's reality, and I think back in my career and I remember a technical director that I reported to, and he was tough. I mean, he was tough. And he challenged me. And that was the best manager I ever had because he pushed me, and he didn't accept status quo with regard to that. He was always pushing the envelope and pushed me to push the envelope. And I think that was a huge, huge benefit to my career. And it really taught me to think differently about a lot of things.
Absolutely. What about your favorite music?
Oh my, I'm kind of I'm an older guy, as you can tell. So anyway, I kind of tend to go to more like the '80s stuff, and it's just like that. And my wife, actually, I'll share, she's a big George Strait fan. So it wasn't too long ago we were at a George Strait concert here in Jacksonville, Florida, which we live just north of there. So that was one of the things. I country music, I enjoy those, and not necessarily. I mean, sure, I could pick out some, but from a genre standpoint, that's kind of where I go.
That's
Some
what
of
I've
those.
got me a George Strait cowboy hat from back then, my country
Yeah.
girl days. What about the best advice you've ever received?
You know, I used to be one of the things I didn't mention is I had a role as inside Mars as a manufacturing application development manager. And the best advice I ever got came from a manager. And it was kind of funny. He retired about 10 years ago and he just reached out to me and we texted on Sunday. And so, but we were actually doing a kind of a Christmas get together, if you will. And I had two sites I was responsible for, and we were developing, I earlier, a few years prior, I'd taken plant floor information from the Wonderware story and other tools, and I put it on the intranet. And we actually wrote the pages ourselves using active server pages and coded them. And this was long before you had all the technology now to do that. And so what happened was, the business moved into a corporate role, into another corporate role, back onto the snack food side. And with that, I was part of a manufacturing application development, doing that same kind of thing, taking the plant floor information and putting it out on the web, not the internet, but the intranet internally. And so anyway, I was there and he put up a slide. My manager put up a slide and he had take the hill shy. And it was this hill, and there was me on the top. And he said, I can give Jeff a task. And he said, any task. And he said, he'll get it done. Doesn't matter what it is. He'll go to the top of the hill. He said, here's the problem. He said, there's bodies laying all over the trail. You know, I plowed ahead and it was eye opening for me because, it wasn't a bad thing because I got the objective done, but I just didn't bring everybody with me. And it really taught me a lesson, and it opened my eyes to that. And that's probably the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, with regard to being more engaging, to bringing people along on the journey, to getting the buy-in, to helping them understand the change and what's in it for them, as we talked about. And that's probably, that was probably by far the biggest piece of advice. And my next role was actually an operations manager. And I had 300 people that I was indirectly responsible for within that role. And so, it was huge for me because I did a lot of things very differently from what I'd done previously. Simply because how do you create a more engaging, more learning, a more winning environment at the end of the day? Yeah.
Absolutely. You got me. I got little tears up here. That was a great story, and it resonates with me because I absolutely have run off and left people behind without telling them about the vision, even right, like and helping them understand. So, really, really great job. And so, my last question for you is just, what would you tell a young person coming into our industry?
So we talk about that, and we talk about if we think about the younger generation, they're thinking first off, I think they're starting to come back around because you can obviously get a technical degree, go into the trade school and come out making more money than you can in many cases, from a bachelor's degree at a university doing something else that, it doesn't yield the same result, I guess is the simplest way to say it. And what I would say is, they're going to tell you, okay, well, there's there an app for that? And so it really frustrates the older people because they're trying to teach some of these younger people, okay, here's how you do this work. And they're down there actually doing the work and they're looking at the younger person trying to get them to watch. And the younger person's up here on the phone and they think they're just out surfing the net or, the social media, whatever. And many times they're on YouTube and they're actually looking to see what this person did. So I think really, kind of going off of that as well is how do we, especially in this piece now with artificial intelligence and AI. And as you know, we're in generative AI. At some point, we're only a few cycles away from general AI, and it's really evolving very fast. And it's one of the things. The last classes I've done, I've actually mentioned to them. I said, I asked a question. I said, "Are you keeping up with AI? How many of you do AI?" And literally, no hand will go up in the room. And I said, you really need to be thinking about this because you're going to be left behind. And that's the hard truth. And I'm not an expert in it by any stretch of the imagination. You've got other guys that are much more advanced than me. But just how do you apply that to the roles that you have and what can you do differently? And can you learn from this and leverage it? Because I mean, it'll code for you, it'll do all kind of things. I mean, we have robots now that are working South Korea, for example. They're working side by side with factory workers and they're doing the lesser tasks, the more menial tasks, and supporting that individual. But again, how do you set yourself up for success? And what I would say is how do you become a continuous learner? That's really the challenge. I think you're very good at that. I think I'm good at that. But I really encourage anybody that's coming into this industry is don't read one book a year. read 10 books a year, but understand them and think about how do you go and apply this. But it's also, not necessarily books, but it's just all the videos. It's just like you mentioned earlier, just tons and tons and tons of resources out there. But clearly artificial intelligence is the key. And
Well,
we
I
have
think
so
it's
many.
great,
Go ahead.
Jeff, what you mentioned, and just for us being able to talk to each other, the value in each generation. And you are so correct. They are not just playing on their phones. I'm asking a question and I'm thinking that they're ignoring me, and they've got the next step and solution. And like, yeah, we're going to be right over here. Even if it's like as simple as like a restaurant, right? Like I've like tried to look it up 5 different ways, and they have us immediately already at check-in. So look at what they've learned by using the technology. And then, we can work together to teach them some of the stuff that we know too, which I love. Jeff, I feel like you got something else to say before we wrap up.
Well, no, I was going to say you're exactly right, and I think the real challenge is how do we leverage the younger generation to help the older generation. And I was, it was only a few classes ago that I was teaching, I think actually at the university, and one of the guys was younger, and he said, I help the old guys. He said, they're doing it this way, and I'll say what to do. And I said, but if you did this way right here, it's much faster and you get the same result. And so that's the continuous learning part we talked about, is how do we not only as we age continue to learn, but also when we're coming in too, how do we learn from those younger people? They've got in some cases a better mousetrap, and as long as it meets the expectation, it does the precision maintenance tasks that we're looking for, and it doesn't violate some safety or environmental standard or anything like that. And then how do we learn from that and improve? At the end of the day, absolutely, it's about the
Absolutely.
team, not the individual.
Okay. So Jeff, if people want to talk, get in touch with you, how do you want them to reach out?
So obviously there's LinkedIn. You can reach out on LinkedIn. You can also reach me, at Shiver at peopleandprocesses.com is another option. And, both of those routes will get to me. And of course, there's Tammy Pickett, and, she kind of herds the cats for us a little bit in the people and processes side. And so with her, she can always find me. And I might be very well teaching a class or something like that. And the only thing that I ask is, if you send me an email or something, give me a little time to respond, because just like I'm constantly doing traveling or something else. And so it may take me a day or two to respond to you. But, and if I don't, obviously ping me again. But
Yes,
usually I'm pretty.
absolutely. Connect with Jeff and Tammy on LinkedIn. You'll see them at a different event, and hopefully you'll be able to catch them there. Jeff, I've loved working with you and Tammy over the years, and I love your ability to tell a story. It is so great, and just thank you so much for that. Um, until next time, everybody, be empowering. Thanks.
Thank you.